In 1912, a scientist told the world that continents move, and the entire scientific community laughed him out of the room. In the 1960s, a writer begged people to believe the FBI was following him. They put him in a mental hospital instead. Both of them were completely right. This is 33 times in history when the crazy people turned out to be the only ones telling the truth. 1. In 1912, a German meteorologist named Alfred Wegener stood before Europe's most respected scientists and basically said, "Hey, has anyone noticed that South America and Africa look like two puzzle pieces? That's because all continents used to be one giant landmass." The response was not applause, it was open, public ridicule. Geologists called his theory delirious, and the establishment never let him forget he was a weather guy, not a geologist. He spent nearly 2 decades collecting fossil evidence, rock samples, and climate data, and died on an expedition in Greenland in 1930, still widely dismissed as a crank. It took another 30 years and the discovery of plate tectonics for science to quietly admit Wegener was right all along. His frozen body, still buried in Greenland's ice, has since drifted about 2 centimeters per year on the very tectonic plate he predicted existed. 2. Ernest Hemingway, one of the greatest American writers who ever lived, spent his final years telling anyone who would listen that the FBI was following him. He said agents were tapping his phones, reading his mail, and trailing him everywhere. His friends thought he had lost it. His doctors diagnosed paranoia and treated him with electroshock therapy, which destroyed his ability to write, the one thing that gave his life meaning. In 1961, Hemingway took his own life. Then, decades later, his FBI file was released under the Freedom of Information Act. Hundreds of pages long. The surveillance had started in the 1940s, ordered by J. Edgar Hoover himself. They had tapped his phones, monitored his mail, tracked his movements. The paranoid man was the only one in the room who was right. 3. For most of the 20th century, if you told someone that corporations were deliberately designing products to break faster so you would have to buy new ones, people would call you a conspiracy theorist. Except it literally happened. In 1924, the biggest light bulb manufacturers on the planet, including General Electric, Osram, and Philips, gathered in Geneva and formed a secret cartel called Phoebus. At the time, bulbs lasted around 2,500 hours. These companies re-engineered them to burn out after just 1,000 and imposed fines on any member whose bulbs lasted longer. Researchers found meticulous correspondence documenting exactly how they modified filaments to shorten lifespans. The Phoebus cartel essentially invented planned obsolescence. Every time your phone starts glitching right after the warranty expires, you can thank a group of light bulb executives from 1924. 4. During the Cold War, the United States came up with a lot of creative ways to one-up the Soviet Union, but perhaps none was as spectacularly insane as Project A119. In the late 1950s, the U.S. Air Force developed a top-secret plan to detonate a nuclear bomb on the surface of the moon. The explosion would create a visible flash seen from Earth, showing the Soviets just how powerful America was. This was an actual classified military study, and the team included a young Carl Sagan, who would later become one of the most famous scientists in history. The project was scrapped, partly because officials realized the backlash would be catastrophic, and partly because someone apparently said out loud, "Maybe we should not nuke the moon." But for a brief moment, the most powerful military on Earth genuinely considered turning our moon into a nuclear billboard. 5. On the morning of March 2, 1978, groundskeepers at a small cemetery in Switzerland discovered that the grave of Charlie Chaplin, one of the most famous entertainers in history, had been dug up. His coffin was gone, his body was gone, and when the news broke, most people assumed it was a hoax. It was not. 2 struggling immigrants had stolen Chaplin's corpse and were demanding $600,000 from his widow Una for its return. Una, in what might be the most stone-cold response in history, reportedly said her husband would have found the whole thing ridiculous and refused to pay. Swiss police traced the calls, arrested both men, and recovered Chaplin's body buried in a cornfield about a mile from the original cemetery. He was reburied, this time in a concrete vault, just to make sure nobody tried a sequel. 6. For most of the 20th century, the medical establishment was certain that stomach ulcers were caused by stress, spicy food, and too much acid. Then, in the early 1980s, an Australian doctor named Barry Marshall said, "Actually, it's a bacterium called Helicobacter pylori." The medical community laughed at him, called him reckless, and prestigious journals refused to publish his research. So Marshall grabbed a petri dish full of the bacteria, mixed it into a broth, and drank the whole thing. Within days, he developed severe stomach inflammation, biopsied his own stomach, confirmed the infection, treated himself with antibiotics, and made a full recovery. In 2005, Marshall and his colleague Robin Warren received the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. Sometimes being right requires drinking something truly disgusting. 7. During Prohibition in the 1920s, the American government faced a massive problem. People were still drinking. One of the most popular sources of illegal booze was industrial alcohol, which bootleggers would steal and redistill for consumption. So the government decided to make industrial alcohol so poisonous that nobody would dare drink it. Federal chemists ordered manufacturers to add methanol, chloroform, kerosene, and other toxic substances. People kept drinking it anyway because that is what happens during Prohibition, and they started dying. Over 10,000 Americans are estimated to have been killed by government-poisoned alcohol. When the chief medical examiner of New York City called it legalized murder, federal officials essentially shrugged and said, people should not be drinking illegal alcohol in the first place. Your own government, poisoning its own citizens, not conspiracy, documented federal policy. 8. For centuries, European explorers and missionaries came back from Africa with stories of enormous, hairy, human-like creatures living deep in the forests. The scientific community treated these stories the same way you might treat a friend who swears they saw Bigfoot at a gas station, with polite, dismissive laughter. Naturalists lumped these tales in with sea monsters and unicorns, assuming the storytellers were either drunk, delusional, or both. Then in 1847, an American missionary named Thomas Savage got his hands on actual skulls from Gabon in West Africa, sent them to anatomists, and the western gorilla was formally described for science for the first time. An entire species of massive, intelligent primates had been right there, exactly where locals said, for hundreds of years, and the scientific world had dismissed them as fairy tales. If nothing else, it is a good reminder. When local people tell you something lives in their forest, maybe believe them. 9. In the 1960s, a growing body of research was connecting sugar consumption to heart disease, and the sugar industry was not thrilled. So the Sugar Research Foundation paid a group of Harvard researchers to produce a literature review, published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1967, which downplayed the link between sugar and heart disease and pointed the finger at dietary fat and cholesterol instead. The researchers were paid the equivalent of about $50,000 in today's money and did not disclose the funding source. The result was decades of dietary advice telling people to avoid fat while ignoring sugar. Low-fat products exploded onto supermarket shelves, often loaded with extra sugar to compensate for taste. It was not until 2016 that researchers uncovered the internal sugar industry documents and published their findings. 50 years of global nutrition advice, shaped by a secret check from Big Sugar. 10. In 1975, during the Church Committee hearings, a landmark investigation into intelligence abuses, the CIA was asked about a rumor that the agency had developed a secret weapon capable of causing a heart attack that would look completely natural. CIA Director William Colby confirmed it and brought it out. Senator Frank Church held up on live television a modified handgun that fired a tiny frozen dart made of shellfish toxin. So small it left virtually no mark, dissolving inside the body, inducing a heart attack nearly undetectable in an autopsy. The weapon had been developed in the 1960s as part of a CIA assassination program and could hit a target from about 100 feet away. The fact that this thing was casually displayed during a Senate hearing, like terrifying show and tell, was surreal enough. But the deeper implication was even more chilling. This was just the weapon they were willing to show Congress. 11. For decades, there were whispers that the British royal family had hidden certain relatives away to protect the family image. In 1987, the truth came out. Nerissa and Catherine Bowes-Lyon, first cousins of Queen Elizabeth II, had been quietly committed to a psychiatric institution in the 1940s due to severe learning disabilities, and the family listed both women as dead in Burke's peerage, the official record of British aristocracy. Neither was dead. Nerissa lived until 1986. Catherine survived until 2014. For decades, they were alive, locked away, and officially erased. A 2011 documentary revealed there was no known record of any royal family member ever visiting them. Their own aunt, the Queen Mother, was a patron of MKUltra, a charity for people with learning disabilities, while her own nieces sat forgotten in an institution. 12. In 1799, a dried specimen of a strange animal arrived in England from Australia. It had the body of a small furry mammal, a flat tail like a beaver, webbed feet, and the bill of a duck attached to its face. The scientific community was convinced it was a hoax, a taxidermist's prank, a duck bill sewn onto a beaver-like body. British zoologist George Shaw literally took scissors to the specimen, trying to find stitches where the bill was attached. He found none, because there were none, because the platypus is a real animal that actually exists. And it gets better. The platypus lays eggs like a reptile, produces venom like a snake, detects electrical fields like a shark, and nurses its young through patches of skin rather than nipples. The platypus did not need to be a hoax to be unbelievable. It just needed to be itself. 13. For decades, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover publicly and aggressively denied the existence of organized crime in America. He called it a fiction of journalists and Hollywood. In his FBI's own New York field office, 400 agents were assigned to hunting communists, and exactly 4 were investigating organized crime. The reason has been debated. Some historians believe the mob had compromising information on him. Others think he did not want an enemy he could not easily defeat. The facade crashed down in November 1957, when state police stumbled onto the Appalachian meeting. Over 60 high-ranking Mafia bosses from across the country gathered at a private estate in upstate New York. Hoover was forced to create the top hoodlum program practically overnight. The Mafia had been operating for decades, right under the nose of the man who swore they did not exist. 14. In the late 1960s, Ford Motor Company released the Pinto, a cheap, compact car with one small problem. The fuel tank was positioned so that even a moderate rear-end collision could turn the entire car into a fireball. Ford knew about this. The fix would have cost $11 per vehicle. But Ford ran a now infamous cost-benefit analysis. 180 estimated burn deaths at $200,000 each, 180 injuries at $67,000 each. Total cost of not fixing the car, $49.5 million. Total cost of fixing it, $121 million. They chose the cheaper option and shipped the cars. People burned alive in collisions that should have been minor fender benders. When the internal memo leaked, the public reaction was volcanic. It remains one of the most disturbing examples of corporate ethics reduced to a spreadsheet. 15. During the Cold War, the idea that the United States was building a secret nuclear-powered base underneath Greenland's ice sheet sounded like a James Bond movie. But that is exactly what happened. In 1959, the U.S. Army built Camp Century, tunnels carved into the ice cap with living quarters, a hospital, a chapel, and a portable nuclear reactor, housing over 200 soldiers. Officially a research station, its real purpose, classified as Project Iceworm, was to deploy up to 600 nuclear missiles aimed at the Soviet Union, all without informing Denmark, which controlled Greenland. When the documents were declassified in 1996, Denmark was not thrilled. The base was abandoned in the mid-1960s when shifting ice proved too unstable. And today, climate scientists worry that melting ice could expose the radioactive waste simply left behind underground. The Cold War gift that keeps on giving. 16. For centuries, sailors told terrifying stories of enormous sea creatures with writhing tentacles that could drag a ship beneath the waves, the Kraken. Naturalists dismissed it as the hallucination of men who had spent too long at sea drinking rum and staring at waves. No one could produce a living specimen. All that existed were fragments, a beak washed ashore here, a tentacle found in a whale's stomach there. Then, over the 20th century, giant squid carcasses started turning up, animals stretching over 30 feet with eyes the size of dinner plates, the largest in the entire animal kingdom. But it was not until 2004 that Japanese researchers finally photographed a live giant squid in its natural habitat over 900 meters deep in the Pacific. Centuries of sailors' tales, dismissed and filed next to mermaids, turned out to be grounded in a very real, very enormous creature that was just really good at avoiding scientists. 17. In 1962, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest-ranking military leaders in the United States, drafted a plan called Operation Northwoods. The proposal suggested staging terrorist attacks on American soil, blowing up a U.S. ship, hijacking planes, and orchestrating violent incidents in American cities, all to be blamed on Cuba as justification for invasion. This was a formal, written proposal signed by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and presented directly to the Secretary of Defense. President Kennedy rejected it. The documents were classified for decades, and anyone who suggested the military had ever considered attacking its own people was labeled a conspiracy nut. Then, in 1997, the documents were declassified. Everything was there, in black and white, on official government letterhead. Operation Northwoods never happened, but the fact that it was seriously proposed at the highest levels remains one of history's most uncomfortable truths. 18. In 1633, a 69-year-old Italian astronomer named Galileo Galilei was dragged before the Roman Inquisition to answer for his crazy idea that the Earth revolved around the sun. At the time, the official position of the Catholic Church was that Earth sat motionless at the center of the universe. Galileo had been publishing evidence for years, using his telescope to observe the moons of Jupiter, the phases of Venus, and sunspots. None of it mattered. He was found vehemently suspect of heresy, forced to publicly recant his findings, and sentenced to house arrest for the rest of his life. Legend says he muttered, "And yet it moves," after his recantation, though historians debate whether that actually happened. What is not debated is that Galileo was right, the Church was wrong, and it took the Vatican until 1992, 359 years, to formally acknowledge the error. 19. If you have ever wondered why American cities are so car-dependent, part of the answer involves an actual conspiracy. In the 1930s and 40s, a company called National City Lines, backed by General Motors, Standard Oil, and Firestone Tire, systematically bought up electric streetcar networks in cities across the United States, ripped out the tracks, scrapped the trolleys, and replaced them with buses manufactured by General Motors, running on Standard Oil gasoline, rolling on Firestone tires. By the late 1940s, over 60 transit systems had been converted. In 1949, General Motors and its partners were convicted of conspiring to monopolize the sale of buses and related products. The penalty was a $5,000 fine for the largest corporation in the world. Historians debate the full impact, since many streetcar systems were already struggling. But what is not debatable is that these companies conspired to replace public electric transit with their own products and succeeded on a massive scale. 20. For decades, the Chinese government accused the Dalai Lama of being a puppet of Western intelligence agencies, and most of the world dismissed this as typical Cold War propaganda. Except the Chinese were right. Declassified documents confirm that from the late 1950s through the 1970s, the CIA paid the Dalai Lama a personal annual stipend of $180,000 as part of a broader multi-million-dollar covert program supporting Tibetan resistance against Chinese rule. The CIA also funded paramilitary training for Tibetan guerrilla fighters at a secret camp in the Rocky Mountains called Camp Hale. The Dalai Lama's administration has since acknowledged the funding, stating it was used for political activities rather than personal enrichment. But the core fact remains: One of the most revered spiritual figures of the 20th century was, for a significant period, on the payroll of the Central Intelligence Agency. 21. During World War II, the US government needed a place to secretly enrich uranium for the atomic bomb. So they built an entire city from scratch in eastern Tennessee and simply did not tell anyone it existed. Oak Ridge was constructed starting in 1942, and within 2 years it had over 75,000 residents, making it one of the largest cities in Tennessee, with houses, schools, churches, a hospital, and the most advanced industrial plants on Earth, all surrounded by fences and guard towers. It did not appear on any public map, and most workers had no idea what they were actually building. The city consumed more electricity than New York City at its peak, and its residents only learned the truth on August 6, 1945, when the bomb they helped build was dropped on Hiroshima. An entire city of 75,000 people, hidden in plain sight, producing the most destructive weapon in human history, and almost nobody knew. 22. In 1932, the United States Public Health Service launched a study on the natural progression of untreated syphilis. The subjects were 600 African-American men in Tuskegee, Alabama, mostly poor sharecroppers told they were being treated for bad blood. In reality, they received no real treatment. Even after penicillin became the standard cure in the 1940s, the researchers deliberately withheld it. They wanted to watch the disease run its full course through blindness, organ damage, insanity, and death. The study continued for 40 years, until 1972, when a whistleblower leaked the details to the press. By then, dozens had died, wives had been infected, and children had been born with congenital syphilis. It remains one of the most profoundly shameful episodes in American medical history, and its legacy of justified distrust in government-run health programs persists to this day. 23. On the morning of June 17, 1972, 5 men were arrested inside the offices of the Democratic National Committee at the Watergate complex in Washington, caught breaking in and attempting to wiretap phones. When 2 young reporters at the Washington Post, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, began investigating, they found the break-in was connected directly to President Nixon's re-election campaign. Nixon's inner circle had been spying on political opponents, sabotaging rival campaigns, and orchestrating a massive cover-up involving the CIA, the FBI, and hush money. The White House called it a third-rate burglary and dismissed the reporting as slander. But Woodward and Bernstein kept digging, guided by their famous source, Deep Throat. What started as a marginal theory from 2 persistent journalists ultimately led to the resignation of the President of the United States on August 9, 1974. The first and only time that has ever happened. 24. After World War II, the U.S. launched Operation Paperclip, a secret program to recruit German scientists and bring them to America before the Soviets could get them. Over 1,600 Germans were relocated between 1945 and 1959, and many were brilliant. Some were also committed Nazis. Werner von Braun, the most famous, had been a member of both the Nazi Party and the SS, and had overseen V-2 rocket production using concentration camp labor where thousands died. In America, he became the celebrated father of the space program. To facilitate their entry, U.S. intelligence scrubbed their records and created clean backgrounds, directly violating President Truman's explicit order barring active Nazi supporters. So the next time you watch a rocket launch and feel a swell of patriotic pride, just remember, the American space program was built, in part, by men who once built weapons for Adolf Hitler. 25. In 1933, a retired Marine general named Smedley Butler, at the time the most decorated Marine in American history, came forward with an astonishing claim. A group of wealthy Wall Street businessmen had approached him with a plan to overthrow President Roosevelt and establish a fascist dictatorship. The plotters wanted Butler to mobilize 500,000 veterans to march on Washington. Butler reported the conspiracy to Congress, and the media reaction was brutal, not toward the alleged conspirators, but toward Butler. Time magazine called it the best laugh story of the year. But a congressional committee investigated and concluded that a conspiracy had indeed existed, No one was ever prosecuted. The wealthy men involved went back to their lives, untouched. The attempted fascist takeover of America was confirmed, shrugged at, and quietly forgotten. 26. During the Manhattan Project in the 1940s, researchers at several hospitals across the country secretly injected plutonium into living hospital patients without their knowledge or consent. The patients were ordinary people who had come in for unrelated ailments. They were given radioactive material at doses 5 times higher than what scientists considered safe. Then their bodily fluids and tissue samples were studied. One patient was a young boy. Another was a man misdiagnosed with terminal cancer, who lived for decades unknowingly carrying plutonium in his body. The experiments continued even after the war ended, and the full story remained classified until the mid-1990s, when a journalist uncovered government documents. Your government, injecting its own citizens with nuclear material in secret, not during a dystopian movie, during a Tuesday in 1945. 27. During World War II, after Pearl Harbor, the U.S. Navy had a serious problem. The ports of New York were vital, and German saboteurs were a genuine threat. So they went to prison and cut a deal with Lucky Luciano, the boss of bosses of the American Mafia, who was serving 30 to 50 years. The arrangement was simple. Use your network to protect the waterfront, gather intelligence, and help with the upcoming Allied invasion of Sicily. In exchange for better conditions and eventual release. It worked. Luciano's associates patrolled the docks, reported suspicious activity, and provided contacts that aided the Sicily landing in 1943. After the war, Luciano's sentence was commuted, and he was deported to Italy. The U.S. government had made an official alliance with the Mafia to fight the Nazis, Operation Underworld. The name says it all. 28. In 1953, Iran had a democratically elected prime minister named Mohammad Mossadegh who had committed the unforgivable sin of nationalizing Iran's oil industry, taking control from the British-owned Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. The CIA, working with British intelligence under the codename Operation Ajax, orchestrated a coup. They bribed military officers, funded street protests, planted propaganda, and organized mobs. On August 19th, Mossadegh was overthrown and replaced with a monarch friendly to Western oil interests. For decades, the U.S. denied involvement, and Iranians who claimed their democracy was stolen were dismissed. Then, starting in 2000, the CIA officially acknowledged its role. The coup installed a regime eventually toppled by the 1979 Islamic Revolution, an event that defines U.S.-Iran relations to this day. One covert operation, and the consequences are still unfolding 70 years later. 29. In August 1939, just 1 week before World War II began, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. On the surface, simply an agreement not to attack each other. The Soviets aggressively denied any secret agreements, and Western governments could not prove anything. Then Poland was invaded from both sides, and suspicion turned into near certainty. It was not until 1989 that the full truth came out. A secret protocol attached to the pact in which Hitler and Stalin literally drew a line across Eastern Europe and divided it between themselves. Finland, Estonia, Latvia, and Eastern Poland to the Soviets. Lithuania and Western Poland to Germany. Two dictators sitting at a table, carving up nations like a birthday cake, and then lying about it for 50 years. 30. During World War II, the Japanese military ran Unit 731 in occupied Manchuria, a covert biological warfare program where scientists conducted experiments on live human beings, infecting prisoners with plague, cholera, and anthrax, performing vivisections without anesthesia, and testing the limits of frostbite on conscious subjects. Thousands died in agony. After Japan's surrender, General Douglas MacArthur secretly granted full immunity to Unit 731 scientists in exchange for exclusive American access to their biological warfare data. When the Soviet Union tried Japanese war criminals and accused the U.S. of a cover-up, American officials dismissed the accusations as communist propaganda. It was not propaganda. It was exactly what happened. The architects of some of the worst atrocities in human history walked free, and some became prominent figures in Japan's post-war pharmaceutical industry because their data was deemed more valuable than justice. 31. On August 4, 1964, President Lyndon Johnson told the American people that North Vietnamese torpedo boats had launched an unprovoked attack on the USS Maddox in the Gulf of Tonkin. This alleged second attack became the justification for the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, giving the president authority to escalate military involvement in Vietnam, a war that lasted over a decade and killed millions. For years, anyone who questioned whether the attack actually happened was dismissed as unpatriotic. Then in 2005, declassified NSA documents confirmed what skeptics suspected. The second attack never occurred. Intelligence reports had been manipulated to justify a response the Johnson administration already wanted, and analysts who raised doubts were overruled. An entire war fought on the basis of an event that did not happen. Millions of lives shaped by a phantom attack in the Gulf of Tonkin. 32. Before 2013, if you said the government was recording your phone calls and reading your emails, people would suggest you adjust your tinfoil hat. Then a 29-year-old NSA contractor named Edward Snowden walked out of a secure facility in Hawaii carrying thousands of classified documents and handed them to journalists. What those documents revealed was staggering. The NSA had been collecting data from servers of Google, Apple, Facebook, and Microsoft through a program called PRISM, vacuuming up phone metadata from millions of Americans via secret court orders and tapping the phones of allied foreign leaders. The crazy people warning about mass government surveillance turned out to be entirely correct and had actually underestimated how far it went. Snowden is still in Russia, and the debate over traitor or hero continues. But one thing is settled: they really were listening. 33, and finally, the granddaddy of "that sounds too insane to be real." Project MKUltra. Starting in the early 1950s, the CIA launched a secret program to explore whether human behavior could be controlled through drugs, hypnosis, torture, and psychological manipulation. Their favorite tool was LSD, administered to unwitting subjects including CIA employees, military personnel, prisoners, and random civilians, often without any consent or knowledge. The program involved over 130 sub-projects across universities, prisons, and hospitals. When it was shut down, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered virtually all files destroyed. But a clerical error preserved around 20,000 documents which surfaced during 1977 Senate hearings and blew the program wide open. For decades, anyone who claimed the CIA was experimenting with mind control was labeled delusional. Turns out the delusion was thinking the government would never try something that insane. 33 ideas that got people laughed at, fired, locked up, or called insane. And every single one turned out to be real. Now here is what I genuinely want to know, and be honest. What is something you personally believe right now that most people think is crazy? Not a joke answer. Something you actually believe is being hidden, covered up, or laughed at today that will be confirmed in our lifetime. Drop it below. I want to read every single one. Hit subscribe and like if this video earned it, and I will see you in the next one.